Okay, so here we have an example of a synoptic style written question. As you can see, there's a lot more text than you might find in a smaller exam question. So let's have a read. It is Monday morning when the partner, Mr. Rutherford, calls you into his office for a private meeting. He explains that he has a number of expenses relating to personal expenditure they would like to put through the company's books of accounts. He hands you a file containing a year's worth private bank statements and requests you to identify any expenditure relating to his expensive family holidays and post as an expense to the business travel account. Your response is that you have learnt at college that only valid business expenditure should be recorded through the business books of account. However, his reasoning is that the holidays are there to help him relax from the stress of running a business, so it's only fair that if recorded as business expense. The director implies that as a thank you, he may be able to obtain 2 tickets for 2 seats for the finals of a tennis tournament. When you return to your desk, you complete an internet search and are surprised to discover these tickets are currently selling in excess of £500 each. Outline any potential ethical issues that this work request can bring. In your answer, refer to the Code of Professional Ethics highlighting specific threats that may apply. So this is for 6 marks. So what's going on here? He wants to put a load of private expenses through the business. Do we think this is okay? No, we don't. Because we know that private expenses are drawings. And apparently we know this, and even tell him so. So what does he do? He gives us some rubbish excuse about needing to relax and tries to bribe us. While there is no specific limit as to what constitutes as a bribe, £500 is quite a lot of money, and he is clearly doing this to encourage you to put through his private expenses. So why is he trying to put through his private expenses? What effect would it have on profit? What is the double entry? Well, we would debit travel expenses, thereby reducing profits and his tax liability, and credit capital introduced so the business owes him money for his holiday. He could also credit trade payables, but it would have the same effect. So we know what the scenario is about, but what is the question asking us? Potential ethical issues. What are these? AAT's fundamental principles. Under our Code of Professional Ethics, every AAT member must follow these 5 principles. Professional competence and due care. You must maintain professional knowledge and skill in practice, legislation, and techniques to ensure that a client or employer receives competent professional service. Objectivity. You must not compromise professional or business judgment because of bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence of others. Professional behaviour. You must comply with relevant laws and regulations and avoid any action that may bring disrepute to the profession. Integrity. You must be straightforward and honest in all professional and business relationships. Confidentiality. You must not disclose confidential, professional, or business information or use it to your personal advantage unless you have explicit permission to disclose it or a legal or professional right or duty to disclose it. How do we remember all these? Topic. Threats. What are these? Self-interest. An accountant's personal or other interests may inappropriately influence their judgment or behavior. Self-review. Where an accountant evaluates previous judgments made by themselves. So if the accountant had prepared the accounts, then they can audit the accounts as well because they would be reviewing their own work. Advocacy. Threat that an accountant promotes a client's position to the point that their objectivity is compromised. Familiarity. Risk that an accountant is too trusting or accepting of information provided by a client or employer because of a long or close relationship with them. Intimidation. An accountant may act inappropriately due to an actual or perceived pressure on them. So those are our 5 threats to the fundamental principles. So which of the 5 ethical principles are under threat here? Professional competence and due care. You must maintain professional knowledge and skill in practice, legislation, and techniques to ensure that a client or employer receives competent professional service. Do we think this is under threat? This mainly relates to us as AAT trainees doing things that are beyond our means. So if the partner said, "Can you please help this director set up a trust for their children?" Or "Can you advise this client on the best way to distribute their assets in their lifetime to avoid inheritance tax?" and you accepted as an AAT trainee, then this would be beyond your level of professional competence. In this scenario, we know what is the correct accounting treatment. Our employer just doesn't want to hear it. Objectivity. You must not compromise professional or business judgment because of bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence of others. Do we think this is under threat? Well, he is trying to bribe us, which could create a conflict of interest. We might be inclined to put the expenses through to get those sweet tennis tickets. So I would say our objectivity is under threat, both because of the potential bribe and also because he is the boss and he is possibly trying to intimidate us. Professional behaviour. You must comply with relevant laws and regulations and avoid any action that may bring disrepute to the profession. Do we think this is under threat? Well, if we were to put the expenses through this might be regarded as money laundering and it would be tax evasion, as we are trying to get our tax bill down. So we could say this was also under threat. Integrity. You must be straightforward and honest in all professional and business relationships. Do we think this is under threat? Well, is the partner being honest? He knows this behaviour is not on, but he is doing it anyway to A. Get his tax bill down, B. Potentially get the company to finance his private expenses. So we could say this was also under threat. Confidentiality. You must not disclose confidential, professional, or business information or use it to your personal advantage unless you have explicit permission to disclose it or a legal or professional right or duty to disclose it. Do we think this is under threat? This really relates to disclosing things about a person or business we should really not be sharing. In this scenario, this is not an issue. Now, there is no set way of writing the answer to these questions, but you do need to make sure you are answering the question. Outline any potential ethical issues that this work request can bring. In your answer, refer to the Code of Professional Ethics highlighting specific threats that may apply. Pause the video and have a go yourself. Give yourself 15 minutes. Okay, here is a version of the answer. There is no set way to write this. I, as an AAT member, must abide by the Code of Professional Ethics, of which several are being tested in this situation. My employer has confronted me and asked me to put expense through the profit and loss, which he knows not to be business related. This is dishonest of him and a breach of integrity. To do so would reduce profits and the tax liability, which could be deemed as money laundering and a breach of professional behaviour. I confronted him about the matter, to which he replied he would potentially reward me with a gift in excess of the value of £500. Any reasonable individual may regard this as a bribe and a threat to my objectivity. This could create a conflict of interest threat and be seen as a criminal offence under the Bribery Act.